Hey everyone, welcome back to the Effective Public Speaking course. Today it's going to be about establishing your purpose. Lesson 2 we talked about smiling, and now we're going to go into some more serious, more constructive topics, so make sure to listen up. What does it mean to establish your purpose? Establishing your purpose is putting your best foot forward with making an impact with that foot, right? I'm going to come back to this, but let's just go and see something for a second. Right now we see two megaphones just screaming at each other, right? And I guess they're actually very patiently talking, but since the megaphones are going to be loud, right? Which probably insinuates an argument that's happening. If this is how most of your debates or conversations go, then that is not good. When you establish your purpose, you're making sure that the point that you are making is effectively able to bridge the gap of knowledge between you and your audience. Because let's say you're an informative speaker, right? Maybe your audience isn't an expert about what you're talking about. When you establish your purpose, you at least give the audience a roadmap of the destination you're going to get to and the different points along the journey, right? And the way that you're going to do this is by drafting a good thesis. Now, what makes a solid thesis? Well, a good thesis will say exactly all of the supporting points, right, in a concise manner. And we're going to get into this in just a second. But when I say all the points, it's just going to be quick descriptions of each of the things, right? It's going to be almost like a list, but not exactly. It's a little bit difficult to explain without seeing a thesis on the screen, so I'm going to show you it in a few slides. But for right now, the reason your thesis has to be the most well-rounded, the most solid part of your argument, right, is because you're going to be drawing back to this during each paragraph of your essay or during every time you make a big point in your speech. So if your thesis is very weak, effectively your argument will fall apart, right? Your thesis is essential. It is the most essential part of what you're saying, right? It is the main point of your argument, right? As it says, the paramount point. And so even if you don't look at the essay, you don't listen to the speech, right? If you know the thesis, you know what the argument is about. So if it's a confusing thesis, if it's very poorly written, obviously that's going to lead to more confusion and just error along the line. So let's look at some examples, right? And this is just what the thesis should be. It should be very direct, right? There should be no fluff around the thesis like to just cushion whether or not you can be right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong. A thesis is your opinion, or it is a kind of as objective as you can get statement that is going to be able to explain what you think, right? So it has to be direct. It definitely has to be concrete, meaning it's based on facts and there's not really that much room for interpretation. Because again, you're trying to be very explicit with what you're trying to say. And then it's also good to be concise, because you obviously don't want to take up 4 sentences for a thesis. In my personal experience, I usually use 1 or 2 sentences, right, for the thesis, because when you're speaking, it's a little bit different from when you're writing, right? So you can have a little bit of leeway with that, but definitely not 3 or 4 sentences to the point where you get an entire thesis paragraph. Remember, it's a thesis statement, right? So it should definitely not be very long. It should not be very fluffed up. It should not be kind of implicitly implying things beyond the scope of your argument, because that's a whole that leads to a lot more interpretation than is needed, right? And what that does, it eventually just ends up making everything much more hard, much more difficult to understand later on. Alright, so here's a pretty bad thesis, right? The law is completely unfair because my relative in Kansas, who drove very badly in school zones, got pulled over, right? This, logically, right, if logically grounded, it's not very, well-based, because, well, this is a kind of a personal experience, right? A thesis should be kind of more objective than, oh, I think this because it happened to me, right? So this wouldn't be very good in the logic department, so it's not very concrete, right? It's not that concise, it's a sentence, but there's probably better ways to write this, the law is completely unfair because a relative, my relative got pulled over because of inefficient driving, whatever, right? And then it's not very direct because it doesn't tell you why the law is unfair, right? A thesis will tell you the thing that it's going off of the main point, but then also kind of explain those little descriptions of why it's true, right? It'll say the kind of point of each of the following paragraphs in the thesis. So let's look at a thesis that's pretty good. The inconsistency of the law is highlighted by circumstantial evidence, differences in enforcement, and unconscious biases and prejudice. Circumstantial evidence, differences in enforcement, and unconscious biases and prejudice, those are the points that you're going to be focusing on throughout the next 3 or 4 paragraphs. And so circumstantial evidence will take a paragraph, differences in enforcement will take a paragraph, and the biases and prejudices will be another paragraph, right? So it's very structured, it's very organized, and it's like as concise as you can get, because you're saying that the law is inconsistent. Well, why is it inconsistent? Circumstantial evidence, differences in enforcement, and unconscious biases and prejudice, right? Now, there might be better ways to write this, because like at the moment it just looks like you're listing, right? So maybe you add another sentence, right? Just to kind of expand on this a little bit more, but not to the point where it allows for more things to get covered under it. Because you're trying to highlight just these 3 things. You don't want to bring anything else into the argument unless you want to just briefly touch on that, right? So this is a good thesis. Now, what makes a good thesis go to a amazing thesis or a great thesis, right? We have to talk about the difference between confidence and arrogance. Confidence is the thing that will allow you to project your voice. You're going to be very like when you express your thesis, it's going to be a very solid, a very efficient transfer of that knowledge, because of the fact that your audience knows. Well, they will feel that you know what you're talking about, so that being confident will essentially project not only your voice, but your character, your image as well, right? Whereas being arrogant can lead to just kind of differences in an opinion between the audience and the speaker. Because if you show off that you're arrogant, like, oh, I'm better than you guys, so I understand the topic. Like, if you're condescending, you're talking down to your audience, right? That is not going to get the desired effect that confidence will get. Because of the fact that now your audience is not on the same they're not on the same height, I guess, as you. I mean, let's say you're on a stage physically, but now mentally as well. And the reason this isn't good is because now whenever you try and present a point or a thesis, your audience interprets it in a different way than you are, right? So it's important that you have confidence and not arrogance. Now, I just want you to stop, right? I have been speaking pretty fast throughout this video, and I'm going to take a second to slow down. The reason for this is because if you don't want to end up stuttering, the best way to do that, to stop your stutters or using crutch words, is by speaking slower and pausing. Now, it might take a while to get used to, because I admit it, whenever I pause during these videos, it gets very awkward, right? But that's why if you can make your pauses short and efficient enough to where making those pauses is kind of more natural for you, more natural for the audience, it allows the audience to digest the information a lot better. This is probably my number 1 speaking tip. Just taking a second to slow down. When you get caught up in something that you've been working on or that you're very passionate about, it's easy to get carried away and just start just going off on a rant, right? And that's very fast-paced, it's very quick, it's kind of hard to understand at times. So it's important to just take a second to bring it back to 0, right? Going back, just taking that step back, going a little bit slower, will make you more confident when you're speaking, because you feel more in control. And your audience gets, they feel as well that you're more in control. And that's why they're able to trust you a lot more. Think about it. If someone's trying to talk to you about something and they're going really fast, right? Although they might have a lot of passion, it might seem like they have a lot of passion, you might not be able to get exactly what they mean. Whereas if you go slow, you have the time to let these points sink in, right? They sink into your audience, and that's what makes them memorable. So again, what do you want to do? You want to pause and go slowly, and you want to project confidence, not arrogance. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is our final project. If you've looked at the syllabus, you might see that there's an optional final project, and that's just going to be kind of a quick assignment. So if you look in the description below, you'll find my syllabus, and there'll be a quick assignment. I think it's just, writing a quick thesis about something you're interested in, and that way you get practice writing these theses for future classes or just speeches that you might have in general. And on that note, I'm out.